I've been frustrated with liberal America, of which I am surely a part, for a very long time. I I love the goodness in liberal America, and I am frustrated with the weakness shown over the years. And at this moment, um, as much as I love Joe Biden and think that he showed a lot of goodness and maybe even greatness at the beginning of this Israel-Hamas crisis, uh, he's shown once again that unwillingness to play hardball when necessary that has been such a terrible defect in the American political process uh, as the forces of fascism have gained power. I'll say more about this Biden Netanyahu government issue regarding this war. At the end, I want to tell the story first of the pattern that I've seen and that's frustrated me. We can go back to the 1980s, and I can't remember what the year was, but it was in the second Reagan term. Um, I wrote about how the Democrats were needed to match the Republicans in determination to have the Supreme Court be one that gave adequate weight to their values. There had been a tradition that existed up until that time, or at least I believed it hadn't changed in the 70s, maybe. The tradition was that to qualify for the Supreme Court, the person that the President of the United States nominates has to meet two criteria: that they be of good character, sufficient to warrant their being placed in such an important position where we make determinations where the issues are ambivalent or ambiguous about exactly what the Constitution means, to come to one side or another, to come to the right interpretation to help the country move forward. So there's competence, there's character, and then there was competence. Is this person of such high achievement, such a sterling representative of the legal profession, that they warrant the honor of sitting on the nation's highest court? There wasn't supposed to be an ideological criterion. But it became obvious, and I don't remember it all well enough to say, that the Republicans were taking advantage of the Democrats. The Democrats were sticking with this gentlemanly approach where a president gets to put some person of good character and high competence on the court. The Republicans were working visibly to create a Supreme Court that was going to lean heavily in the directions that are important to the Republican Party. You can call them conservative, but you can call it originalist. Well, those are just fig leaves over a set of interests. Not completely, but mostly. And I was frustrated that the Democrats kept on ignoring that one side of the other side was working for ideological purposes. And I felt that the Democrats, okay, if that's the way the Republicans are going to be, to stack the court with right-wingers, the Democrats should use their power in the Senate to judge the ideological acceptability or lack of acceptability of the nominee. Well, eventually, the Democrats did do something of the sort in the nomination of Bork. That was interesting. But in any event, the Democrats have always been slow to play hardball about what kind of Supreme Court we're going to have. It was an asymmetrical situation where one side's working to create a court. Well, we can see what they were working to create because we've got it now. And the Democratic side wasn't willing to match that confrontational, win at all costs spirit that possessed the other side. So the next place I want to look is the early 1990s. I became aware of what Rush Limbaugh was doing to the hearts and minds of our fellow Americans on the right in the early 90s. And I did everything that I could to try to fight for the hearts and minds of those people against this propagandistic, fascistic voice that was increasingly clearly backed by the force that was growing in power in the Republican Party, which we now see fairly clearly for what it is. But it was that back then, too, this part of the Republican Party that was rising. And I did everything that I could. I put almost all my creative energy into doing radio shows where I moved to in 1992 in the Shenandoah Valley. And when the newspaper announced when I got my own show, that called it the Not Rush Limbaugh Show, I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't trying to do something on the left that matched what Limbaugh was doing on the right. It wasn't an ideological thing. What Limbaugh was doing was empowering the lie and the distortion and feeding a spirit of hatred that made impossible for people to reach across what was a growing chasm between the two sides of America. He was dealing in lies, and I wanted to create radio where people, even people who disagree with each other, dealt with each other in a spirit of genuine inquiry, in a search for the truth, as if we might actually learn from each other, and in a spirit of mutual respect, because the hostility that was getting sown was poisonous to the American body politic. And the power of distortion and lies to move people who are basically sane into a place where they had a completely distorted view of the political reality. That was poisonous to a democratic society. So I did everything I could, and I succeeded here in getting my own show. I mean, it wasn't a big deal in the big picture, but it was what I could do. And I was a regular guest on shows from Maine to Washington State, and part of what I was trying to say to my own side is that there's something going on the right that needs to be fought. We can't just forfeit these people and leave them in the hands of folks like Rush Limbaugh, and then joined by the other major voice of that era on the right, Newt Gingrich. I mean, these are propagandists in the worst sense of the term, and I wanted to get as big a platform as I could get. I've never lacked for ambitious swinging for the fences. But I had some dealings with gatekeepers of a liberal sort who had were gatekeepers for bigger platforms than I ever reached. NPR kinds of platforms where I wanted to do talk radio with callers and in conversation to model, which is what I was doing here, what a conversation among Americans should be like. And what I got from these liberal gatekeepers, one of them said it explicitly: Rush Limbaugh's audience is not our concern. Once again, forfeiting a battle that's being fought from the other side with great energy and determination. I mean, who would have believed back in the age of Eisenhower or Jimmy Carter that a force like this could take over a Republican Party, and a major American party, the Republicans, and become a truly dangerous force in American democracy, now even threatening its survival. Well, taking the attitude that Rush Limbaugh's audience is not our concern. Well, I think that it represents a lot of things, but one thing it clearly represents is a failure to understand what democracy requires. Every American needs to be the concern of a political force that wants to protect the nation and from destructive forces, and to be able to advance it into a better future. Because every American who votes plays a role in what direction the country goes. And meanwhile, Rush Limbaugh's audience was absorbing all this poison, all these lies, all this hatred, all this contempt for the other side. They were becoming the people who elected Donald Trump and who are looking to elect him again. It was our concern. But liberal America, as represented by these gatekeepers, wasn't interested in going toe-to-toe to fight for a better outcome against a force that was taking over the conservative America. By the way, one of the things I got to witness doing these radio shows over the course of a number of years in the Shenandoah Valley, I got to witness how they changed. I'll probably do some video about what I've observed, but let's just say they were good, decent. My experience of them in the 1990s was that there was still a lot of the goodness that conservative America is about, in addition to the other stuff. But there are certain virtues and strengths that the conservative America has contributed to what's good about this country. And it got shunted, all this got shunted to the side by the victory of the force that liberal gatekeepers didn't want to take on. Now, the next thing is the 2000 election. This is not quite exactly in the same pattern. I don't really fault Gore for losing a battle that I think he could have won, over which one of them was victorious in Florida, and therefore which one of them was president of the United States. Let me just say that a few days after the whole business of the hanging Chads emerged, and the battle to see who had won the presidency, when it was very close in Florida, and whoever won Florida was the next president. Um, I didn't advocate in this case that what was required was to go play hardball. I had seen that the Bush people were were going to try to win this battle by playing hardball. There had been that Brooks Brothers riot in Florida that we learned about. Um, they were manipulating the situation, and ultimately the Republican appointees on the Supreme Court handed him the presidency. I gather that really Gore should have been the one who won, but it hasn't been out there so clearly that I feel certain of it. But I believe that if the election had been properly conducted, I mean the business of the count, that at the end, Gore would have won by some hundreds of votes rather than lost by a few hundred. But what I did do, because I looked at the Republicans and I felt that there was an approach which had to do with disabling the hardball of the Republicans rather than matching it. I've generally been a marginal character in the American scene, but I had worked for a while at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington on American national security matters. And I had an idea of what Gore could do. And I used what connections that I had and managed to come up with a fax number for reaching Warren Christopher, who had been Secretary of State for a while under Clinton, and who was then, if I recall correctly, the campaign manager for Al Gore. Anyway, I wrote up my idea, which had to do with a completely not hardball approach, but would make it would create a panel of the Americans with the most integrity and have televised meetings with Gore and this group where they advise him what the best thing for America, for him to do at that point. In terms of the genuine political interests of the country, of how to resolve this difficult situation in an optimal way, that he follow that, and that he essentially shamed George W. Bush into also doing what this marvelous group of men and women of integrity were saying should be done. A non-ideological approach where you don't fight, but you allow basically the spirit of fairness, truth, and the American way, as Superman, truth, justice, and the American way would have it, and the American people getting to see that and siding with Gore. And looking askance at Bush if he fails to join in this way of resolving the issue. Well, nothing ever happened with that idea, obviously. That's not what happened, and Gore didn't win, and I don't know that he would have won, but I would bet that he would have won if he'd done that. I don't know whether Warren Christopher ever got that fax. I sent it to the number I was given and never heard anything. I don't know if he looked at it and thought it wasn't worthy of attention. I don't know if he looked at it and then presented it to Gore, but they decided against it. I don't know. But it was another instance where the destiny of America was determined by the willingness of the Republicans, from the Brooks Brothers phony riot to the 5-4 Bush v. Gore decision, that they were willing to do whatever it took to get the power they wanted. And in terms of the destructive consequences of that particular battle being Well, I mean, Gore fought it in his way. I mean, he did okay. Um, but if Gore had won, which I think he would have, well, there would have been no Iraq War. And it is hard to overstate how much that war had destructive consequences at a whole lot of levels in the American polity, in the international system of law that America had played a major role in trying to create. I mean, I have sometimes believed that in the absence of the American invasion of Iraq, Putin would not have done the aggressive things he has done in violation of the international system, like what he did in Georgia in 2008 or 9, and I think it was 2008, and what he was seizing Crimea in 2014, and then the Ukraine invasion, even the bigger thing in 2022. I don't know if, but I could see that the United States did what it did, tore a big rip in the fabric of international order, and that's not been a small thing. So much for the year 2000. Well, then let's go to 2004, where we see once again this pattern of liberal weakness in the face of right-wing hardball. John Kerry was a war hero, and Karl Rove recognized that there was a strategic advantage of using lies to go at John Kerry's strength. That was one of their principles. You fight the enemy by going after his strength. And John Kerry had the strength that here was an American war hero who was decorated as a soldier in Vietnam, who volunteered to go to Vietnam because of his Princeton friend or whatever the deal was. Or am I confusing him with Mueller? Anyway, he was a war hero, and then he came back, and there's this video of him testifying, this young, handsome Princeton grad testifying before Congress, saying who wants to be the last person to die for a mistake, calling on Congress to cease what is obviously going to be an unwinnable war. So he had both sides of that covered. Well, Karl Rove, I don't know whether it was ever established that the people who swift boated John Kerry were working with Karl Rove, but I've never really doubted that it was coordinated. It was ostensibly some independent operation, but it has Karl Rove's ugly fingerprints all over it. They made him out to be a coward. They made his opponent, who was the George W. Bush, who was the privileged son of a prominent Republican family, who used that to actually not only get out of the war, but to fail to complete his obligations about the solution about keeping him out of harm's way. He becomes the war hero. Mission accomplished. You know, when lies defeat the truth, the world becomes a more broken place. And I have to confess that I do not remember everything I understood about the swift boating or everything I wrote about it. I didn't yet have the blog I was going to have starting in 2005, calling out the Republic, this destructive force continually. There's a whole nother story about what I did after the election, but at this point, I did something with what little platforms I had, newspapers um, and radio, um, to call upon the Kerry campaign to make the Republicans pay a price for the lies that they were looking like they could benefit from. And that's the continual pattern. The Republicans have increasingly been doing unprecedented things that the country needs to have them punished for, but they have pretty consistently reaped political benefit from it. And certainly the swift voting of John Kerry was something they reaped great benefits from. It was a very close election. I mean, it all ended up hinging on the outcome in one state, and some people thought that outcome was not fair and accurate. At the very least, things get set up so that in the Republican areas, people don't have to stand in line for terribly long periods of time, whereas in places like Cleveland, the Democratic voter has to be patient enough to stand in line for 3 hours or whatever it was. I mean, that should be enough to say this is simply unacceptable. But anyway, I do think if Kerry hadn't been so on his back foot and slow and weak in his way of responding, and this time I don't remember the details. I think the election would have gone the other way. So 4 more years of these people who are willing to use this war on terror to keep the country divided and to keep the country possessed by fear. You don't want the country to be filled with fear. FDR, when we faced bigger problems than 9/11 betokened, he did not want the country to be run by fear. But in the face of this pretty finite kind of a threat, the guy who profited from swift voting John Kerry was able to keep the country marinated in a state of fear, which is not conducive to the human best. You know, evil works on people's fears. I'm not going to talk about the concept of evil right now here, but let me just say, you can go to my website, abetterhumanstory.org, and I'll show you that there is something that is not at least bit unreasonable to call evil, because it is a coherent force that consistently works to make the world more broken. And that pretty much describes, for example, the nature of the force that has taken over the right, while the Democrats and the liberals have been forfeiting the battle. And that takes us up to 2009. I was very excited when Obama was elected president. I really thought that I could hang up my cleats, and I even discussed with my community of people on my nonesoblind.org, and that's on my website too. You can see the old archive. That maybe there wasn't any need for this website anymore. I just thought that Obama had shown himself capable of doing things that made it conceivable to me that he was going to be the transformative president he evidently hoped to be. I mean, in looking at something like FDR and the ways in which he was able to change America, Social Security and FDIC and all the good things that he accomplished, a real transformative president. And it looked to me like Barack Obama might be that kind of a president. He was coming in on such a wave of energy from the country and from the world. I mean, remember that crowd in Berlin? before he won. And remember that crowd in Grant Park the night that Obama won the election. I was pretty thrilled. It makes me practically feel weepy to think of the potential that got squandered. My son was a student in college, uh, and at Harvard, and he when Obama won, whole thongs of students from Harvard and male and female embracing each other like the end of World War II in those pictures. That such excitement that we had been delivered from the darkness that had descended on us during the destructive reign of W. So many things in disrepair. Not only are politics poisoned, that's a whole story in itself. But the economy collapsing because the Fed allowed bubbles and subprime mortgages to become time bombs, and just a whole raft of things that were in and the international system and our standing in the world. I mean, I wrote a piece. I don't remember all the dimensions of damage that had been done to America that needed to be repaired, including torture being essentially ordered from the very top of the American government in violation of our treaties and of our federal law. And then justified it with this terrible torture memo that John Yoo wrote that basically is a kind of dishonest trap to make sure that nobody is ever going to be held responsible for any crime that might be committed by a presidency, because they've got the person who can't be prosecuted for expressing an opinion, the person who can't be prosecuted because he just followed an opinion, the people who can't be prosecuted because they were just following orders. It was a whole fraudulent thing that basically said, if this is the pattern for American democracy in the future, it means any president can get away with anything. But then Obama comes in and he says, we're going to look forward and not backward, and nothing is going to be prosecuted, though we've got crimes right before our eyes. A nation with the rule of law, but we're not going to prosecute because we're going to look forward and not backward. I mean, every prosecution is about looking backward. It's prosecution for wrongdoing that's already been done, and it's in the past. You cannot make sure that the laws are faithfully executed, which is the oath of office that the president takes. If you're only going to look forward, it means you're not going to enforce the law. Well, that wasn't the only thing. The Republicans, we learned, had met and decided even before Obama's inauguration that their top priority was going to be to make him fail. That is a completely illegitimate position. The Republicans' behavior in furtherance of that priority was completely indefensible. How they dealt with the whole healthcare reform issue was completely indefensible. I won't go into details about that now, but let's just say, Americans had a big need. We're paying twice as much for something second rate as people in every other country. And the rising cost of healthcare was bankrupting the country. It was as obvious as it could be that something needed to be done about it. It's indefensible for the Republicans to have acted as if that weren't true, which they did consistently. They played only a destructive role in that process. And what the Obama put forward was extremely moderate. Let's just say there is a whole big case to be made that everything that the Democrats were trying to do was a reasonable and intelligent attempt to deal with what was an obvious, important national problem. And it had been part of at the center of Obama's election platform. And therefore, he had a mandate to do something about it. And the Republicans acted as if none of that were true. I watched during 2009, which was Obama's first year in office, as he was forfeiting the battle. These Republicans were acting like his failure was their main priority. They were acting like his enemies. And Obama seemed to understand less about how you got to deal with enemies like that than the average boy on the playground. I just didn't understand it. And it's not like he couldn't land a blow, because every once in a while he would do a little jab. He was very good at it. But then he'd back off as if somehow it was ungentlemanly to deal with the people who are trying to destroy your presidency as if they're your enemies. I mean, you were elected to serve certain values, mister. You were elected to help fulfill the aspirations of all those people in Grant Park. There were things that were going to be your job to be the champion, and if they're going to make battle on you, what are you going to do? Lie back and let them? One of my platforms at that time was that I could publish in the I had at least a residual relationship to what a lot of pieces I'd published as op-eds in the Baltimore Sun, and first thing I did was I used what connections I had, and these were very attenuated at this point. I just did whatever I could. I wanted, if I could get 10 minutes with Obama. I realized that was very long shot, but you got to try. Maybe I could make myself look plausible enough at 10 minutes, maybe one chance out of 20. Anyway, I tried. It went nowhere. So I published an op-ed in the Baltimore Sun called An Open Letter to President Obama. I printed here's a couple of passages from it. It is because of your failure to fight back that the Republican Party, behaving more scandalously than any political opposition in memory, has grown stronger over the course of the year. This was December 2009, it was published, while you have grown weaker. And then I wrote, your opponents are relentless, single-minded, and ruthless in their efforts to weaken and destroy you. This is a continuation of the same struggle for which Americans chose you to be their champion. It is your job not to ignore this battle, but to fight and win it. Well, he didn't. He didn't, and in 2010, in a negotiation over where the Republicans were doing their usual blackmail tactic, Obama kind of caved, it looked like to me. And at that moment, I realized this guy's intelligent, he's super decent, he's in many ways a beautiful human being, but he's not going to say what America needs to be told. and I also had observed that uh, my I live in this 2-to-1 Republican congressional district, and the Republican who held the office for 20 years up to that point, um, in 2010, he was elected to a 10th term, and he ran unopposed. So I put those two things together. I thought, okay, Obama's not going to say what needs to be said. Um, and there's this platform of running against this Republican incumbent that went unused in 2010. Why don't I jump into the political arena and jump onto that platform and say the things I think need to be said? So that's what I did. I spent the better part of 2 years. It was February in 2011 that I declared for my candidacy and went and talked to the Democratic Committee of the 6th District, none of whom knew me or particularly, well, I had some support there, but basically they were interested because you generally don't get people willing to run when they're going to lose in a district like this. But for me, the issue wasn't, was I going to win or was I going to lose? The issue was, how effectively could I get this picture of what's going on out into the society? I had hopes. I had hopes, actually, that I might be able to parlay my local district campaign into maybe becoming something of a national story. I mean, like I say, I always swing for the fences, but it didn't seem stupid to think that a candidate like me, I'm not typical of the Shenandoah Valley of rural Christendom, conservative in a Confederacy state. I'm not typical of that. So a candidate like me with a message like mine, and I had something to say that had been at the center of my life for 8 years, developing a picture of the terrible thing that's been rising on the right. In an area like this, I thought it could be a good story. Maybe the New York Times Magazine would just want to do a feature. I also had hopes that maybe somebody like Rachel Maddow might be interested in sort of bringing me on because I was dealing in a bigger picture than anybody was presenting. I mean, it's not just the play-by-play. There's this larger playing field, the whole structure of the struggle. And I had this way of showing that something had taken over conservative America that wasn't politics as usual. That is taking the political battle down from the issues at the level that we had dealt with it in the earlier years of my baby boomer life, of liberals and conservatives with different positions on issues. We had gone down to a different a level of basically, it's visible now. I didn't see it this way. Well, I did, actually, back in 2004. It's democracy versus fascism. And underlying that, please, if you want to see if I can prove this, go to abetterhumanstory.org. At the level of good versus evil, so I ran in the hopes that I could actually not only get the message out here, but that I might be able to use the campaign as a way of getting the more national attention than I ever got when I was doing the None So Blind. I had 2,000 or 3,000 people coming to read my site every day, and I was producing maybe a piece or two almost every day. Sometimes my own, mostly my own writing, but sometimes about things that other people were saying. But I had gotten myself out as far as I was able. Um, swing for the fences, settle for a single. The story of my life. Uh, the the campaign was a success at a very tiny level, like my radio show had been a success at a very tiny level. Um, I did as a radio in the radio show create a community of discourse that came together on a regular basis where I and the conservatives of this area would have constructive conversations about the questions of meaning and value that we face in our lives. Half of those being about matters on which we disagreed, like controversy, and half of them about our common humanities, to make sure that we continue to recognize, the value and humanity of one another, even though we disagree about some things. And the campaign was a success in its little way. Um, uh, you can you can Google Schmuckler, that's my last name, and Labor Day, and you can see the highlight of my campaign, which was a speech in which I showed the sick and broken spirit um, that had taken over the Republican Party. It's not your father's Republican Party. I said I think I was the first one to use that phrase. But anyhow, and it was at a banquet where Mark Warner and Tim Kaine were the featured speakers, and I was one level below them as a candidate for Congress. And I delivered the best speech of my life, and just by good fortune, it got videoed, and it went viral. So it was a moment when I was out there, um, in like 100,000 views or something like that, and I still like to hear that speech, and I hope you'll go listen to it, because the picture is there. I mean, we're years from Trump here in Labor Day 2012 at this banquet in Harrisonburg, Virginia. But already the issue of the fundamental dishonesty, the insatiable need for power and wealth, uh, the lack of genuine principle, and the manipulative, exploitative abuse of their supporters, and all the stuff that we can see now in such a grotesque form with the Trump Party was already there in 2012, and I had an illusion there, though. I mean, I'd like you to go see it, because I saw what was already there. And Trump is a symptom of what was already there, in addition to being an agent that pushes things still further toward destruction and fascism and the triumph of the lie. So look at that speech if you want to see that portrait. But that speech also, when I look at it, I realize that I had failed to understand how far gone the conservatives that I had known and loved already were. I believed, wrongly, as events have, I think, shown, that the good conservatives that I knew out here, and therefore I imagine is typical of the Republican base throughout the W years. I believe that they were successfully fooled by the way that the Republicans were able to hide what they were, that they could posture as defenders of the good, all for the Constitution, those the hypocrisy of the Republicans walking around with those Constitution booklets in their pocket. I mean, this is an outfit that's shown contempt for the Constitution in an increasing way for a generation. But Christian values. I thought that they were fooled the way I thought a lot of conservatives had been fooled by the pious, tricky Dick Nixon. So in that speech, you can hear me saying that we need to go out there and convince the conservatives that the political force they're supporting is not the friend of their own deep values. But either they don't really hold those values, or they were beyond reach of being able to be shown the truth. I think it's more the latter, but because it's not like they didn't believe the things they told me in the 1990s. I think I would have picked up if that was phony, but somehow they're not of a piece, so that there was a way they could be led into having those values and supporting something which was their opposite. I didn't understand that yet. I mean, this whole Trump business has shown that at least for some years now, that's been the case, that they one way or another, they are beyond being shown the truth. Either they don't, either they're possessed by the part of them that really welcomes the opposite of their values. And I think there is some of that, but that's a whole issue itself, having to do with child rearing and moral structures that it internalize and confusions that can arise. Or they're in some kind of a relationship with authority that they've given themselves over, that they can be led simply not to see what's obvious. Anyway, so that's the campaign. Then in 2014, there was a big election, of course, a midterm election. I had been frustrated by the campaign of 2010 because the Democrats had failed to use that campaign to expose the Republicans, whose behavior on Obamacare was absolutely indefensible. But likewise, on a broader scale, after Obama's reelection, the Republicans were doing across the board obstructionism. It didn't matter how good the proposal was. If Obama wanted to get it done, they were going to stop it. And there were even quotations one could get that, if it were, that basically their campaign has always been to act destructively when the other party's in power, and then persuade the American people that the reason things didn't go better is that the other side was in power. And I fault the American people for not being able to see through that BS. But anyway, they were basically taking all the power away from the president, because they were going to use what power they had, regardless of the proposal, to make sure that Obama accomplished nothing, looked ineffectual, and would discredit both the government and the Democratic Party for the next election. And the congressional election of 2014. Oh my. the Republicans are trying to make Obama look weak and ineffectual, and the Democrats don't bring that up at all. It should have been the central part of the campaign. I have a whole preface to this other book, What We're Up Against. My frustration that though the Republicans did all this for all to see out in the open, it could hardly have been clearer that these Republicans were even worse than indifferent to the good of the nation, as they had calculated that making the government fail was their best ticket to partisan success. And then I talk about that's what the campaign should have been about. But what about the Democrats, whose political interests and even survival depended on the electorate seeing how the other party had betrayed the nation? If Democrats wouldn't bring that issue forward, who would? And if not in a national election campaign, then when? This should have been the central issue of the 2014 campaign. What could be more pertinent to a congressional election than how to get a Congress that will do the people's business? But from the Democrats on this issue, including the president, hardly a peep. That left the American electorate hating Congress for failing them, but nonetheless inclined to hand still more power to the party that deliberately made Congress the dysfunctional mess that they hate. And the Republicans shellacked the Democrats in 2014 as a reward for what should be punished. And the liberal side of things is continually failing to play the hardball that's required. You don't deal with forces like what has taken over the Republican Party as if they're your friends on the other side of the aisle, as Democrats continue to say, when friends is what they clearly were not. So come 2016, I'm wrong again, by the way. I want you to recognize that I claim where I've been right, but I want to be honest and admit where I was wrong. I again misjudged the Republican base in 2016. I was in favor of Trump's getting the Republican nomination. I thought that was going to destroy the Republican Party. I did not think that the good, decent conservatives that I knew to be a significant portion of the culture around me would go for Trump. I thought that, the 40% that made him the nominee was, okay, well, that's worrisome. But, he's not going to get much of the other 60%, I thought, because they're good, decent people. Well, again, I was wrong. They were further gone than I believed. They were not. My image of their goodness was not adequate to explain where they were. And Trump got their votes, evidently, judging from the 2016 election. Oh, by the way, I'm glad that people seem to be saying more and more openly that James Comey's stupid, reckless, I don't think evil intervention just before the election is why we got Donald Trump as president. I mean, it's sort of like the butterfly effect. I mean, it's not quite so trivial as a butterfly, but that so much would hinge on one man's stupid decision. There's a disproportion. Just like, we get the Iraq War because a woman in Palm Beach draws a ballot that confuses people who want to vote for Gore into voting for Pat Buchanan. It's a little bit bigger to say that what Jim Comey did about the investigation and Hillary's emails, which was a nothing. But he puts it out there, and the polls move, and Trump ends up winning. I'm glad that people are acknowledging that. I've spent my life trying to understand the big forces that shape history, and there are big forces that shape history. And again, please go look at betterhumanstory.org. Those big forces are very significant players, but there is also this random kind of thing where something that could very readily have gone the other way. Um, has an effect, the butterfly in the jungle and the whole weather pattern around the planet. If the Archduke hadn't taken that route and gotten shot, might the whole world have avoided World War One? Hard to know, but on a little decision, it's at least conceivable that that whole nightmare of World War One that showed civilization to be so broken in so many ways, and that did so much to sow the seeds of future brokenness, like the way World War II emerges out of the world of World War One. So there is that random aspect of things. But let's go back to the deep pattern here. We see that liberal America is really afflicted with a fatal kind of weakness of not fighting the fight that needs to be fought the way it needs to be fought. So we get Trump, and I very readily see that this guy is acting in impeachable ways. There's some failure of memory here on my part about exactly all that I saw fairly early in the first year of Trump's presidency, that this guy, it is time to be looking into the possibility of impeachment. I do remember that the emoluments clause was a part of it. I mean, he was definitely dealing in a way that's forbidden by the Constitution. It at least called for an inquiry, and there were other things, and those I forget, that I thought, a sign that this guy was not respecting the rule of law and the Constitution. So I had the just good fortune that the guy who beat me, the incumbent Republican, Bob Goodlatte, who beat me predictably. I got a couple percent, maybe more, for all the work I did, but basically it's a 2-to-1 district, and it didn't look that different from that. Anyway, Bob Goodlatte had been rewarded for being such a good foot soldier of the Republican Party by being made the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. And as you probably know, having observed impeachments lately, the chairman or the House Judiciary Committee is where the whole process is supposed to begin. So if Trump was acting like he was perhaps guilty of the kinds of high crimes and misdemeanors and consequent threat to the constitutional order that Trump already looked like, that Bob Goodlatte was the guy to be pressing that issue, looking into that possibility if it could compellingly be argued that there were things happening that called for such an inquiry. And I think it could have, even though I couldn't do it right now. So I had a certain standing, as you can imagine, having been Goodlatte's recent opponent, to go and challenge him about, do your job. You have a constitutional duty to da 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 da. And I did that by going to Harrisonburg, where that's not his main headquarters, but it's the second biggest city, or maybe tied for second in Goodlatte's district. And so he's got an office there. And I was able to create an event covered by the TV and newspaper and such like that in the area, uh, um, challenging Goodlatte to do his job and to launch an impeachment inquiry and laying out the reasons why it was clear that that was called for. So that was what I did, but predictably, um, uh, Goodlatte wasn't going to do that. He's a Republican lackey. He was there to um, protect the Republican president. Oh, I was wrong again at the end of 2017. I thought that the Republican Party, the elected office holders in Congress, would be um, uh, distancing themselves from Trump and let him sink on his own. I misunderstood two things. I misunderstood how much Trump already controlled them, and I misunderstood Trump's ability to get away with things. At one point I thought, well, he's been doing this his whole life, but under the scrutiny of that a president gets, you can't get away from. He's going to learn his lesson. I hate to admit that I misjudge things like that, but in any event, um, the Republicans and Bob Goodlatte were not going to. They were the tools of Trump, not anything that would they would honor their oath of office, or at least not get in the way. But meanwhile, the Democrats, I don't know if anybody else feels this way. I feel that the Democrats were way late in impeaching Trump. They started the thing in 2019, and they held the trial in the early 2020, an election year. I think that they basically got pushed into doing it. Like Merrick Garland going after prosecuting the coup, which is another instance of this. He has been dragged kicking and screaming into, he wanted to keep it to the just the people on the scene, and not go into the obvious higher levels, where in public we had a president that was summoning this mob to do these things. So, there we are again, not playing hardball. Obama says, I'm going to look forward and not backward. When it came to the crimes of the Bush people around torture and otherwise, here we have with Merrick Garland. Would he have even ever done it if it hadn't been for the committee in Congress? The committee in Congress did do its job. That was the beginning of liberal America, getting the right wood on the ball. I don't know how you do better than the January 6th committee did. They did put on a series of television shows that were expertly designed and executed to tell the American people the truth they need to know. That was very refreshing. And then Merrick Garland, I think, feels compelled, considering what the country's been shown. How can he not name a special prosecutor? But we wouldn't be in this trouble right now about timing, whether Trump's going to be able to run out the clock and maybe get reelected and pardon himself or whatever. We wouldn't be in that situation if Merrick Garland had been, as up for the battle as the situation called for. The whole country had witnessed this man showing a willingness to destroy American constitutional democracy for his own particular purposes, to hang on to power, to keep himself out of jail, to become America's first dictator, whatever. There should not have been a moment's hesitation, but liberal America has habitually shrunk from the battle. The battle has been forced upon them at every turn. It's Trump that forces the battle. It's Trump that forces the battle over the documents. I mean, the Justice Department and the Department of the Archives and all that went out of their way to try to get things taken care of without necessarily having to use the weight of the law against Trump. All he had to do was comply with a subpoena. Okay, you got me, I'll return it, and it would have been done. But the Republican side is continually pressing the battle. It is they who robbed Obama of his constitutional power to name someone to fill the court, the seat. What the Republicans did should have been challenged in the court. If I had been president, I would have taken the whole issue to the Supreme Court, saying that these Republicans have completely misused the powers the Constitution intended to give them in terms of advice and consent. I think it's a winnable case, and it certainly should have been brought as a way to alert the American public at the least at the completely unprecedented and unacceptable thing that the Republicans were doing in stealing that seat, which should have been filled with Merrick Garland or maybe somebody who was less in the thrall of the Democratic weakness, apparently. But at least to let Obama fill it, rather than say we won't consider anybody that this guy might name, and rather than have it filled with, which one is it, Neil Gorsuch, this tool of the plutocracy that they get to put on the court instead. I hope this plutocratic court doesn't sweep away the administrative state as it looks like they might. We lose real things in the world when we lose these battles. And we lose these battles if we don't fight these battles. And Obama didn't fight that battle over that congressional seat. And the Democrats, I think, were shrinking from the obvious need to get this guy out of the White House. I mean, never has there been a president nearly so impeachable as Donald Trump. But the Republicans, of course, in the Senate would make sure that he wouldn't be convicted. But the trial itself is worthwhile, and it even provides the opportunity for exposing the complete moral bankruptcy and betrayal of the oath of office represented by Republican senators voting to acquit the most impeachable president most anybody could have ever imagined. But the Democrats aren't all that good at calling out the evil. We're getting better, but there's a problem with this unwillingness to play hardball, and we can see it now. I'll skip to a couple of things here. I've gone on plenty long. I'll just talk about now with Biden and the whole Israeli Hamas battle. Biden represents liberal America's combination of its wonderfulness and its weakness. The wonderfulness is that in this instance, I think that Biden's basic values about what he would like to see happen, his rallying to the traumatized people's support in the beautiful way that he did, and his continual efforts to try to get that the Israelis' way of responding would lead to a better situation and not to a worse one. I think his concept of how things should be, the direction he wanted things to go, showed his basic human decency. And I'm proud to have a man like him representing America because of his goodness. I mean, Lindsey Graham, the things he said about Biden in 2015 about as good a man as God ever created. And if you don't like Joe Biden, there's got to be something wrong with you. People don't say that about a lot of people. So he's sort of a paragon of that aspect of liberal goodness. And all these situations we've been talking about, the Democratic liberal side has been uh, attempting to champion the cause of what that's basically good. I mean, giving Americans health care like every other citizen of every other advanced democracy. I mean, that's advancing goodness. I mean, it is not a good thing for American society. It does not look as good in the healthcare area as Denmark or Switzerland or France. You know, we could look better, and that's what the liberals have tried to do. It's always in the service of goodness, but always having difficulty when up against evil to fight the battle that needs to be fought the way it needs to be fought. Now, in the case of Biden, the Netanyahu government, the situation is that the worst elements of Israel are in power in Israel. And these worst elements could reasonably be described as fascistic. What allowed this unique coalition to come into existence is that there is a sociopathic leader, Netanyahu, willing to sacrifice his country to get power for reasons we can, that are a little bit like Trump's, for one thing. And that the only way he can cobble together a coalition with a majority is to bring into the government the outcasts, the fascists, the extremists, the Jewish nationalists, the people who are so possessed by that kind of mentality that, for example, they don't mind if their settlers commit pogroms against Arab villagers. I mean, we have seen this pattern before, and it is not the essence of Israel to be run by people like these people. Their names, these two main people are Smotrich and Ben Gvir. These are people who basically have Netanyahu's short hairs in their grasp because they can topple the coalition, and he's got to keep them on board. But Netanyahu himself has been plenty fascist for a long time. It's not like this goes all together against his grain. He's never been interested in getting the situation, which is such a terribly challenging situation, having to do with the Jewish state established in the Muslim world. Really difficult situation. People have tried and failed to resolve it for years. But progress has been made, actually, but not at the level of the Israelis and the Palestinians, more at the level of the Israelis and the Arab world. And progress was being made. But Netanyahu's been prime minister for a lot of time of recent years. He's served more years than any other prime minister, including a number continuously in which he was clearly sabotaging any possibility of moving things in the direction which could lead to some kind of a just and lasting peace. So he's got those maximalistic, conflict-oriented things within him as well. So he's not that out of step with the fascists that he brings in to the government. And they set about basically tearing the country apart over some completely different issue than the Palestinians, this judicial overhaul. Anyway, the country's got goodness in it. the hundreds of thousands who demonstrated every week against sweeping Israeli democracy aside by killing the independence of the judiciary. All of a sudden, the Hamas attacks Israel in this terrible condition it finds itself in, and poses to the Israeli leadership a huge challenge of how to deal with what was clearly an attempted provocation to get them to do what this Netanyahu government looks like it's doing. I mean, I don't know exactly what they should do, but Biden clearly thinks, and I am pretty convinced that he's right, that what the Israeli government is doing, what this fascistic government that happens to be in power now is doing, is taking Israel on a completely destructive course. It's going to not only be bad for the United States, it's going to be bad for Israel, and it's going to be bad for peace in the region, which has already been, all the progress that was being made of integrating Israel in with its neighbors, the Abraham Accords, and the coming deal apparently with the Saudi Arabians, all that gets undone because the Israelis plunged themselves in that fascist spirit into the trap that the fascists that run Gaza had set for them by making it impossible to attack them without killing innocent civilians, and by inflicting on the Israelis the most unspeakable horrors. That was the trap. How to deal with it? Well, Netanyahu is dealing with it with the way fascist, this government. So there has been a departure here. I mean, Biden has been finding himself, and I hear that he recognizes that he's in a situation where this government is basically giving him the finger. They're saying, yeah, we'll take all the weapons you give us and all that support because you're saying you're not going to make your support contingent on anything. And we're going to thumb our nose at you and do the fascist things that we want to do, which is to level Gaza, kill 20-some thousand people, and not combine that with any meaningful steps that can signal that we have really any kind of good intentions with the Palestinians. So that's been increasingly evident. I mean, there was a time after this when it looked to me like, again, I guess I err in the direction of optimism in general, but I could imagine that this Israeli government, because they said that they brought in the opposition in this unity government. I thought that meant that only a wise course of action would be okayed by the people brought in. They would exercise veto power over how fascistic or stupid the Israeli response would be. I see no evidence that this Israeli government is being corrected in any way, and they are not. I don't think they're helping Israel's long-term chances for survival, and that's why it's a trap that was set by Hamas. Hamas's goal is that the Jewish state should disappear. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's what they want. And I think that they have made a significant stride in that direction because Israel has antagonized the whole region and much of the rest of the world in ways that weren't necessarily inevitable if the Netanyahu government were making the right decisions. At least that's what I believe. And apparently Biden has recognized that after that initial area where there was a delay in the response and it was still possible to believe that Netanyahu would restrain what he would do, well, it soon became clear that there was a gap opening up between what Biden probably knew to be the better course of action and what this Israeli government, which represents the worst of Israel, was doing. And challenging that thing is not necessarily politically untenable on the Israeli scene. You look at the poll numbers that this Netanyahu and his government have; they are terrible. The Israeli people seem to be eager to get rid of them as soon as this war is over, which leaves them in a position where they can wage the war in a way which means that the war won't be over. They got no interest in its being over. Well, you play hardball. Damn it. You don't say, well, no matter what you do, we're going to be behind you 100%. No, you denounce, you criticize, you put word out to the American people, but especially to the Israeli people. What they're doing isn't really what's best for the country. This is not the best. I want to support Israel, but I don't want to support Israel doing something that's going to actually destroy its prospects for survival by antagonizing the whole region and reversing all the advances that have been made. We need to make progress toward a different kind of situation. And what this government is doing, this unpopular government is doing, is not representing the spirit of the free society that we're delighted to support, that we've supported for all these years. Since 1948, America has supported this democratic nation. We're eager to support you, but we want to support the spirit of a free society, which is for truth and justice and for leading things into a better direction, and is not the spirit of fascism, which is what underlay the atrocities of October 7th, and I fear is playing too much of a role in determining the response to this. We need to get a response that goes in this direction, and we're not going to support with our weapons, our money, something which is destroying the chances for achieving the purposes that we share of the survival of a free Jewish state in this region. So that's what I would do as president. I would write a lot better speech. I wasn't too impressed with that one, but you get the point. You don't shrink from a confrontation. When Netanyahu gives Biden the finger, Netanyahu should step up and match what he has received in some way that gets the better of him. That's the name of that's what you're up at. When you're up against something like that, that's how you got to deal with it. No more Mr. Nice Guy. You start off like Biden did, encouraging. Then you deal with them in the back room, not trying to create a fissure. But you reach weeks before now, the point where you start widening the gap, applying the pressure, and doing things that are choreographed to maximize the chance that either this government will do the right thing or it will be replaced. Well, it's interesting to ask, and believe me, I have asked myself repeatedly over many, many years, why has liberal America been so weak in this consistent way? I won't go very deep into answering that question right here and now, but I think there are answers. Some of it has to do with attitudes toward conflict. Some of it has to do with fears of conflict. A lot of it has to do with ways of understanding, with values. And there's another dimension which I've dealt with at some length, which I won't go into here, that there's a kind of polarization that takes place when a country is becoming broken. This is at a very deep level, and I'll make another video about that if I can get my thoughts well together. But one of the things I said when I was running for Congress is that America has been divided into one party that makes a conflict over everything, even when what the country most needs is the parties to deal with each other in a spirit of cooperation. And I was thinking about healthcare reform in part at that point. And we've got another party which won't fight the fight over anything, even when the good of the nation clearly requires that they stand up and fight against a destructive force. So there's a kind of polarization that I've striven to understand, where things get divided into this package and into its opposites. The Republican package has been real excellence in the ability to fight in the struggle for power successfully. But it's combined with a spirit of brokenness, so that what it does in the world with that power serves the force of destruction, evil, whatever. And we've got another party which has the opposite package. It has goodness instead of evil, constructiveness instead of destructiveness. But it somehow lacks the heart and intestinal fortitude and moral and spiritual passion of the warrior that evil should be summoning force onto the battlefield. One of the portals on my website, abetterhumanstory.org, one of the portals is called Press the Battle. And that came out in 2014, before what we're up against, which is 2015. And press the battle is the message. Don't just wait for the other side to do something provocative. Take the battle to them. Be aggressive. Biden used that bully pulpit. I would have liked Biden to be more press the battle against this Republican force that's still owned and run by Trump since the inauguration. I didn't support Biden in the 2019 primary season until he became the obvious choice, because he, like Obama, doesn't have that passion that rises to meet the enemy when the enemy makes that necessary. But I do love him. I loved Obama. And I love the values of liberal America. I love the rule of law. I love the idea of power being controlled by a constitution. And I just wish that the liberal side would press the battle to the extent that it can, the greatest extent that it can, that is still maximizing its power in the struggle for power that's ongoing, in which the stakes are democracy surviving or fascism taking over. I really wish that the situation in the Middle East weren't so ugly. And Biden has a chance to do something to lessen the damage to the United States and maybe change the course of the war. But he's got to be willing to play hardball with this crowd that is running Israel right now. Thank you.